Well, COVID-19 has undoubtedly had a negative impact on people's livelihoods globally. The Women in Informal Employment, Globalising and Organising has created an initiative called Coping in Crisis. It aims to show the pandemic's impact on women in the informal trading sector. Let's discuss this further now with the organisation's Caroline Skinner. Caroline, a very good morning to you. And we talk about the plight, especially and the needs of women informal traders. What is their plight? Where do they find themselves a year into this pandemic, or just over a year?
Uveka, thanks very much for the opportunity. We actually didn't just focus on informal work, on informal traders, but informal workers in general. And the plight, the impact has been very significant. So we have in South Africa very good labour market data in the quarterly labour force survey, and that showed that just under 1.5 million informal workers lost their livelihoods during the second quarter of last year, so hard lockdown. And this represents around about 29% drop in informal employment in comparison to an 8% drop in formal employment. And job losses in women's informal employment were greater than men's in all types of employment. So this is the case kind of internationally. Bear in mind, lockdown meant that children were not at school, but also it's where women are located in the labour market. They tend to be in the more precarious jobs that were impacted more significantly.
We know that the plight of informal workers and traders was bad enough already, before this pandemic even hit us, and it was a daily battle for many of them. But what were the stories you were hearing, Caroline, especially over this past year, especially when they weren't allowed to be out there doing anything at all, to the time where we had restrictions being eased and maybe they could trade a little bit more? Have most of them have to give this up completely, or are they trying to scratch their way back as well?
Absolutely. So, we go as a network. We have close ties with informal worker-based movements. I had constant kind of contact over the hard lockdown and more recently. And I think the stories we were hearing were people really struggling to get by. So one survey we did in Durban found that 90% of our interviewees were struggling to feed their children. So this food insecurity is, very prevalent, particularly in that period. And now we're seeing this kind of gradual recovery in jobs. So, quarter three, around about 300,000 jobs, informal jobs were regained. And then in quarter four, another 140,000. But this still means that last year we lost over 1 million jobs, informal worker jobs. So also bear in mind, with informal workers, when you're back at work, it doesn't mean you're working on the same number of hours, nor the same earnings. So what we're hearing across the board is very constrained demand for goods and services that informal workers provide. The situation is hard out there.
Yeah, and if we consider the knock-on effect, it's not just these informal workers and traders, it's those who would have supported them who actually might find themselves in dire straits as well. So what do we do to help them? What's the plan, Caroline?
So, the government has put in place a whole range of support measures, as you well know. There was R500 million assigned to small business support in April of last year. And what we're seeing is that informal workers are really struggling to access particularly small business support. They've drawn down on all of their savings and really need monies to reestablish themselves. So there's something about the kind of requirements that the Department of Small Business Opportunity or Small Business Development or the hurdles that they're requiring people to overcome in accessing those funds. So you have to have a range of registration processes. It assumes you have access to the internet, so that's often very tricky for people. And so we're finding that those monies are not getting into the hands of informal workers. So over this period, we touched base with, if we focus on traders particularly, with trader leaders periodically. And at the last meeting of trader leaders across the country, not one leader reported access to a particular grant targeted at traders. So there really are some kind of issues that need to be tackled. Obviously, it's not all a bad story. So, cash grants are profoundly important over this period. We know that the child support grant is particularly well targeted at households that have informal workers in them. And the caregivers grant was very important. All the research shows it really stopped many South Africans falling into poverty. But that was discontinued in October of last year. The special COVID grant, again, very important around injecting cash into the economy, is due to be discontinued at the end of April. And again, there's issues around gender issues. So if you get a child support grant, you can't get the special COVID grant. So women are being discriminated against, so much so that it could be legally challenged. So the crisis is not over.
Of course.
And that cash grant, governments across the world are spending, and the cash grants inject monies into the hands of poorer folk who then spend monies on local goods and services. So get the kind of wheels of the economy going.
Well, COVID is going to leave us in a state of crisis for decades to come. Caroline, thanks so much for that. Let's just hope that there's some kind of silver lining for informal workers and traders. Caroline Skinner, she's part of WeGo. It's Women in Informal Employment, Globalising and Organising, and they're helping with an initiative called Coping in Crisis.